Welcome back to the MOOC course titled Corporate Social Responsibility. My name is Aradhana Malik and I'm helping you with this course. And we were discussing about the stakeholder approach to CSR, and we had started talking about what stakeholders are, what is the meaning of stakeholders, and how they fit into the overall working of the organization. Now, in this class, we will talk about the stakeholder approach. What the theory states, what it's all about. So let's see what this is. Okay, what is the stakeholder approach? Freeman and McVey propose that when we talk about the stakeholder approach, Freeman and McVey say that that managers must formulate and implement processes which satisfy all and only those groups who have a stake in the business. So it is everybody, but nobody outside that group, only those who have a stake in the business, and that is what we are going to deliberate upon in this class. Who are stakeholders? How do you define stakeholders? Okay. Now, characteristics of the stakeholder approach: it is intended to provide a single strategic framework flexible enough to deal with environmental shifts without requiring managers to regularly adopt new strategic paradigms. So it is one framework, it is a single framework that has the dynamic ability built into it, which means it is able to sense how the environment is changing and it can adapt to the environment. Now, strategic management process actively plots a new direction for the firm and considers how the firm can affect the environment as well as how the environment may affect the firm. We are talking about the process of strategic management. This means that this is an active plotting of how the firm is being affected by the environment, how the firm is affecting the environment, and what direction will this firm environment relationship interaction take in the future. How will this contribute to both the firm and the environment in future. Okay. The stakeholder approach is directed towards the survival of the firm, and in doing so directing a course for the firm, not merely optimizing the current output. When we talk about stakeholders, we are talking about people who are affected by people, organizations, groups, communities affected by the existence, the working, the development, the growth of the firm. So the firm has to survive, and we are talking about the approach, an approach to management that is directed towards the firm's existence continuing. Okay. Now, let's take the example of the journalism sector, for example. When we were growing up, the way news was spread to people was through radio when I was growing up. Then came the television. Internet came when I had grown up. And so for us, the way of getting news was through radio, television, and newspapers. When I was studying in my college years, we did not have access to TVs in our rooms. All of us used to have radios, and some of us used to subscribe to daily newspapers. We used to have a newspaper in our reading room, and we would go there, and all of us used to sit and read the newspaper. So that was one way of getting the news. Now, if we thought about taking a piece of the news, we would just go ask the warden's permission, cut out a piece of that news and stick it in what we called as a scrapbook. We did not have the internet to go back to and look for archived newspapers at that time. Now, there were several magazines at that time that we were all very, very fond of, and some of these magazines, as the internet came in, things started getting digitized. So some of these magazines that got digitized continued to be in circulation. Newspapers whose digital versions were available still continued to be popular, but the magazines that did not adapt to the digital evolution slowly went out of circulation and were no longer available. There used to be a magazine called the Illustrated Weekly. I remember it was a very old magazine, and one day we heard that it was not going to be printed anymore, and I don't know the reasons for it, but the Illustrated Weekly eventually went out of circulation. I'm assuming that if they had kept up with the times, and if they had, you know, and some of these things went out of circulation because they were not subscribing to the ongoing development. They were not taking the ideas from the environment and incorporating them in the way they were propagating their news. So, you know, and one more way of getting in touch with people. Nobody had thought that the telegraph service would be shut down. We cannot send telegrams anymore. When I was in college, the only way of getting in touch with people, with your family, one was, of course, the STD had come by then, the straight trunk dialing, which came and went. These days nobody hears about it. If you have a landline, you'll know what I'm talking about. But straight trunk dialing on the phone. So, you know, I don't think we can book trunk calls anymore. Straight trunk dialing was, you just dial 0, you have all these codes and you dial from home. And then telegrams. I have sent telegrams home informing my parents of good and bad news, and we have received telegrams, and we used to work on brevity of our messages for telegrams. So when the internet came, the telegram became obsolete. Now, some of you will say I am confusing obsoleteness of technology with how businesses progress. All I am trying to tell you is that this example of journalism, of the broadcast media, the organizations that survived were the ones that adapted to the needs of their stakeholders. People are no longer willing to hold a physical book in their hands. They are, but they also want to have a backup. Many of you want to have a backup. Many of you want to read newspapers and magazines online. You all are lucky. You know, many of you, all of us, in fact, I should say, growing up, we did not have so much information at the click of a button. We had to physically go through piles of newspapers to find what we needed, and if it was lost, it was lost. The only way of getting a copy was to go either to a public library or to the newspaper office, and then we used to get that news. So what I'm trying to say is that, you know, this is so important to keep the needs of your stakeholders. We were talking about people, the withholding strategy last time. How do stakeholders influence businesses? So we are focusing on, you know, how firms are trying to survive, and technological development is one aspect. Another example that I can give you here is of the recent case of a very popular TV personality not being so popular anymore because he chose to misbehave with one of his team members. And I will not take any names. I'm sure you are you know who I'm talking about. And this person behaved badly with his team member again and again, and finally the team member said, I will not work with you anymore. And this person probably did not realize that the stakeholders, the people watching that TV program, did not want to see this kind of dealing. They did not want to associate with, they did not want to support the behavior of a person off screen. This kind of negative behavior of the person whose work they enjoyed so much off screen. It's not only about what this person was giving to the people, it was also about the perception of this person as a nice progressive human being. So if this person chose to misbehave with one of his colleagues, that was not acceptable to the stakeholders, even though they were not directly, they were in no way related to the issue. One needs to keep the stakeholders in mind to stay in business. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It is very, very essential for any firm, any business to keep in mind the needs of its stakeholders and adapt to them. Okay. So you can't just do what you want, you have to know what the people around you want and adapt to their needs. So it is, the stakeholder approach is directed towards the survival of the firm. You are given certain powers, the iron law of responsibility. You don't use your powers, your position responsibly, it will be taken away from you. Okay. The stakeholder approach encourages the management to develop strategies by looking out from the firm and identifying and investing in all the relationships that will ensure long-term success. It's not only output and input, it's not only people buying what you're selling, it is not only what you are what you're giving to them in return for what they give to you. It is ensuring long-term success. So it is aligning your needs, your value systems with the value systems of your stakeholders. If you want to stay in business, this approach encourages the management to develop strategies by looking out from the firm. You go out and you see what people would like to see you as. It's all about maintaining a public image. Not only about maintaining a public image, doing things, indulging in activities that help you create and maintain an image that your stakeholders will find appealing. Okay, so that is very, very essential, and you can't fake it. It has to be a part of the organization's strategy. It has to be something that the organization does 24/7. Okay. The stakeholder strategy is both a prescriptive and descriptive approach rather than purely empirical and descriptive. The stakeholder relationships can be created and influenced, not just taken as given. So this strategy helps organizations understand what stakeholders will need. We will talk about it later. What do stakeholders need? How do you find out what they need? And then doing whatever will help you strengthen the relationships later. It's not only inherent. The firm can be taught to create stakeholder relationships. Stakeholder relationships are not just existing, they can be created and they can be sustained and they can be influenced, by what the firm does. Then the stakeholder approach is about concrete names and faces for stakeholders rather than merely analyzing particular stakeholder roles. It's not about the whole society, it is about specific stakeholders. It is about clearly demarcating the boundary between stakeholder and society. Who is a stakeholder? Who is going to be influenced by what we do? Who is going to be able to influence what we do? It's not everybody. Okay. It calls for an integrated approach to strategic decision making. Managers must find ways to satisfy multiple stakeholders simultaneously. We can't say, okay, this is who we are going to satisfy now and this is who we are going to satisfy later. A common thread needs to be identified that can satisfy multiple stakeholders with a group of activities. So multiple stakeholders need to find the work of the organization appealing at the same time. These stakeholders could have conflicting interests, they could have conflicting value systems, they could have conflicting ideologies, and still the firm, in order to stay in business, must be able to find out how to tweak what it's doing and appeal to these different ideologies, different mindsets, different expectations of different stakeholders. Now, why do we pay so much attention to stakeholders? Normative theory says that there are clear definitions of right and wrong. We appeal to stakeholders because it is right to do so. We must look after people. We must go above and beyond the consequences of stakeholder management. But the question that is asked by researchers is that, do we need to do that? Is there a fundamental and moral requirement to adopt this style of management? Maybe, maybe not. Normative theories say that we must do what is right. Is there really a need? That is the question Freeman and McVeigh ask. Managers should make corporate decisions respecting stakeholders' well-being rather than treating them as a means to a corporate end. So managers should make decisions. They need to find out what the stakeholders need, what will enhance their well-being, and then act accordingly. And ethics of care emphasizes the primacy of network of relationships that create the business enterprise. A business is not only made of inputs and outputs. Business is made up of relationships, networks of relationships. And how do we take care of those networks? By finding out who is there, who is a part of that network, and how we can satisfy them, how we can appeal to their mindsets. How we can appeal to their mindsets, how we can appeal to their ideologies, how we can appeal to their sensibilities, and how we can help them see us, the firm, as somebody who is concerned about them, as somebody who is looking after their welfare, as somebody who is taking care of their needs. Okay. Stakeholder firms will emerge when stakeholders hold critical assets, expose these assets to risk, and have influence and voice. We were talking about Truman's paper regarding withholding and usage strategies. Okay. We were talking about Truman's paper regarding withholding and influence strategies. Now, withholding strategies means we cut off the firm's access to resources. Usage strategies are when we let the firm know how to use, we put conditions, or we lay down certain conditions that the firm can use in order to use the what we have. So it is the influence that is exerted by stakeholders that really influences, that really affects what organizations do. Stakeholder firms will emerge when the stakeholders hold critical assets, something that the firm needs, expose these assets to risk, threatening the firm that they could lose these assets if they do not listen to the stakeholders. And then this will lead to the stakeholders that have both influence and voice. Okay, how do you manage stakeholders? Freeman and McVeigh suggest two strategies. One is buffering. Buffering and bridging. Buffering is aimed at containing the effects of stakeholders on the firm. So how do firms, we've talked about how stakeholders influence firms. Now this is the other side. Yes, there are stakeholders, but how do I manage them? So one strategy is buffering, which is aimed at containing the effects of the stakeholders on the firm. It includes activities such as market research, public relations, and planning. I find out what they want. I do market research. I establish contact with them. I maintain a friendly relationship with them. I do public relations. And I plan to satisfy them. I plan to go in, find out what they need, plan my activities. So I try and stay ahead of the game. Bridging involves forming strategic partnerships. It requires recognizing common goals and lowering the barriers around the organization. Partnering is proactive and builds on interdependence. So it is about getting in touch with the stakeholders and forming collaborative partnerships. It requires find out what the goals of the stakeholders are, find out how the organization can satisfy them, and then lower the barriers that separate the stakeholders from the organization and build bridges between the stakeholders and the organization. And it is proactive and it is based on interdependence. You need something from me, I need something from you. If both of us need something from each other, our relationship is going to be much longer lasting. Both of us have influence over each other, and that is another way to manage stakeholders. Now, I think that is all we have time for in this lecture. We will continue with some more discussion on the stakeholder approach in the next class. Thank you very much for listening.